Past few weeks, I borrowed a word list from a man a couple of decades ago, but who was observing the world, who was observing the changes that were coming to this world, especially he noted changes that were coming because of that continue coming because of technology and the internet. And in his observation, he's writing as an English scholar, English in the sense of England. And he said these are the 5 words that are changing in their use and their perception in the world today. His purpose was not spiritual. He didn't use the word God as in the report that I read. But as I came across this list, I noted, I think that if his observations are true, if our world is viewing these words in a different way, then it can be helpful for us to notice that. But our focus has mostly been, borrowing the language of Romans chapter 12 and verse 2, not to be conformed to this world, but to be transformed by the renewing of our mind. And so I don't know, I can't track the changes of our world, maybe even in our society. But if our world is changing, or if they're not changing, if we will be transformed, if our mind will be renewed in these areas, then that will protect us from whatever changes the world makes, or whatever areas in which they just stubbornly remain where they are, the ways in which that make them the world. So tonight I want to think about this word selfhood. And his observation is the world is changing in the way they view selfhood. What does that even mean? If I understand it, I think the point is just how we view mankind in general, but maybe even more specific, and to make it more applicable, who are you? How do you view who you are? What are the basics? What are the most fundamental things that are true about you? Because there are some things about you that are going to change. If you're younger, then you're probably going to grow taller. No matter what your age, you're going to grow older until you don't. There are things that are going to change, but there are some things about us that are not going to change. And those are essential that we give thought to, that raises questions that need an answer. And I think it's true that our world is constantly changing in the ways that they would answer that question, who are we? We'll spend probably half of our lesson going through just noting how the world views itself, and not just in a general sense, but what the world's idea would be of how individuals should look at and think of themselves, and how people view you, and how they view me, and how they view our society. There's a definite number of people, influential people in our society, that they view you, they view themselves most fundamentally as just a highly evolved animal, the result of a series of changes. Train wreck, that's all right. A series of changes that are the result of a vast period of time and a vast number of accidents, and that this is just the end result of that train wreck. It just so happened that as the train wrecked, it improved itself. Consider this. Hare is an expert writing a report, and he says Hare suspects that the evolutionary pressures that turned suspicious wolves into your pet, outgoing dogs, were similar to the ones that turned combative apes into cooperative humans. Humans are unique, but how did that uniqueness evolve? And notice the title of this article. We've got people spending lots of time and money studying the minds of dogs. If that would be done in the context of the glory of God and what we can see that God put in them, I could see some benefit in that. But this is obviously not the case. And notice the comparison here. Well, wolves became dogs like apes became humans. And this is the wise of our world today. These are the highly educated. These are the decision makers. And so, of course, that's going to produce some change in the way that people view themselves. Well, but what about that process? Now, he describes a past process of evolution. Well, who's to say that process is over? So what's going to come after humans, if this is the idea? We're not even a finished product. Several years ago, I visited the Field Museum, the Museum of Natural History in Chicago, Illinois. It's world-renowned. in its displays and information. And there were several things that caught my attention that day. This was one of them. It was a beautiful display, so you can see the vibrant colors and precise photographs. And then in the middle was this statement, "From so simple a beginning, endless forms, most beautiful and most wonderful, have been and are being evolved." And so as you look at the pictures, you see all these animals, but do you see, like that old show, one of these things is not like the others? Do you see something there? Down here at the bottom is this picture of this little boy. And that day, and still as I look at that, I think of the thousands of children that come through this museum on a school field trip. Families, grandparents bringing their grandchildren, and they look at this, and I don't know how many it sinks in on, but you get the impression this is intended to make. You're just like the rest of these. These just changed a little bit, and that's how you got here. And so then that begs the question, well, then what's going to come next? And did you know there are people who they think they have the answer, that technology is going to produce what is next. We're just one part of the evolution. And then next, eventually, technology is going to grow to the point that humans become mundane and useless. There are people who literally, there are conventions. There are huge amounts of money being poured into the idea. Sometimes they call it the singularity, the point in time when humans are surpassed by artificial intelligence, by technology, and then humans just get passed over and then on to the next phase of evolution. I mean, that sounds like a sci-fi movie, but there are people who take that very, very seriously. The question is, what does that do to who we are and how we view who we are if we're just one step in the process of what is coming next? But this isn't limited to atheistic and agnostic scholars. The Catholic Church and many Protestant religious groups claim to accept both evolution and the Bible as though they can go together. I'll just give you one example. In an interview in Time magazine back in 2006, they were interviewing the head of all of the Episcopal churches in the United States of America. And she was asked the question, "What's your view on intelligent design?" And if you've not heard of that, intelligent design is just studying science with the idea that someone created all these things without trying to identify who that someone is. So she was asked about this, and she said, "Well, I firmly believe that evolution ought to be taught in the schools as the best witness of what modern science has taught us. To try to read the Bible literalistically about such issues disinvites us from using the best of recent scholarship." In other words, well, if you read Genesis chapter 1 and you think God really did it the way that it's described there, well, then you're just separating yourself from the table of scholars. Well, I'm okay with being disinvited from that table. Probably you are too. But the point is, this tells us something about how people view, to use that word, selfhood. The point is, who am I? Am I just a highly evolved animal? Related to that would be the idea that we're just a well-organized chemical pool. That's really all you are. Think of the results of that. If our existence is just primarily a well-organized pool of chemicals, well then, what are your thoughts? Where do they come from? Well, your thoughts and your decisions, it's just what happens when chemicals react. You know, you pour, what's that old elementary school science project? You pour baking soda with, is it vinegar? And it bubbles or some other chemical, some other product, and you put them together and it boils over, and that's how you make a volcano or something. Well, there are people that literally, that's what they think. Our decisions that are just what happen when certain chemicals in your brain mix with other chemicals in your brain, then there's a reaction, and that's what your decisions are. How does that work out? When we murder a baby, we just call it abortion. Well, it's just what happens when chemicals react that way. When we kill ourselves, when we murder sick people, and we call that euthanasia. Do you know euthanasia means good death? That's what that word means. rape, genocide, well, they're just chemical reactions. Can't help it. We're just a pool of chemicals. We're not having a so-called philosophical discussion tonight. Theories of ideas, this has real consequences, doesn't it? There's some people who have tried to define, well, some kinds of humans are superior forms of humans, and others are lesser forms of humans, or maybe they don't even quite cross the finish line of what a human is. My race, my tribe, my nation is superior to others in our nature. And then that is just justification for some selfish agenda, and that has consequences. Does it matter? Do you ever ask the question, who are you? People are asking it. There's an idea that is one of the fundamental teachings of Buddhism, and that's the idea that there is no permanent individual. You are not permanent. Your existence as an individual is temporary, and that one day you're going to go out of existence, and there will be no more you. You'll just kind of be absorbed into the universe and just become one with the universe. And in fact, that's kind of the goal that Buddhism describes. The best thing you can do is live in such a way that one day you can just become one with the universe and no longer exist. And maybe you've never met or heard anybody describe that, but our nation, our world, of course, is so interconnected, and therefore the influence of Eastern religions like Buddhism is having an increased influence in our society. So more and more you may live beside, work with, go to school with someone, and how they view themselves, whether you know it or not, whether you can get to that point in a conversation with them to know that this is how they view themselves, is that my existence, not just my flesh, but my very existence, it's just temporary, and one day it will be gone. Some people just kind of throw their hands up and say, well, I just don't know. And not only do I not know, I can't know. I really can't have the answer to that. I talked to a young guy as I was picking up some lumber for the ongoing projects at my house this week, and he was helping to load the wood into that. And in the course of our conversation, he said, well, my church is the mountains. In other words, nature. That's just where I get my ideas and my awe and my inspiration. And basically, that idea says is we just can't really know. So I go where I'm most comfortable, and that's what I do. Think about where that leads. If, of course, there are any number of things that we might not know, but it's something different to say, I can't know. Here's a letter that was written back in 1881. It was a private letter, but it was preserved. So one man's writing to the next and says, I have had no practice in abstract reasoning, and I may be all astray. Nevertheless, you have expressed my inward conviction, though far more vividly and clearly than I could have done, that the universe is not the result of chance. He's on the right track there, isn't he? He says, inwardly, I think the universe is not the result of chance. But then, with me, the horrid doubt always arises whether the convictions of man's mind, which has been developed from the mind of the lower animals, are of any value or at all trustworthy. Would anyone trust in the convictions of a monkey's mind, if there are any convictions in such a mind? Do you see? He's saying, I just can't know. Because I lean that way, that we're not here by chance. But why would I trust my own mind? Why would I believe that I can believe and know anything? Because my mind is basically just an advanced monkey mind. There's not that many steps between my mind and the mind of a monkey, according to him. Would you be surprised to know these are the words of Charles Darwin? He's the one that said, I really don't think we exist. The universe exists by chance, but I'm just kind of an advanced ape, and so who really knows? And basically he throws his hands up and says, I can't know. Here is a man who in many ways shapes our education today, not just in our nation, but around the world. The experts, the scientists, there are some who are questioning the things that have been assumed and accepted from him by faith. But here is some of the private and very honest and open admissions of Charles Darwin. Do you see in this a hopelessness if I don't really know who I am, and I don't think I can know really deeply who I am, the most basic things about me? If your Bible's open in Romans chapter 1, now we're going to get to more of what we're really focused on, and that is of what God has said. And in Romans 1 and verse 23, we learn some things about the past that with a little bit of time and a little bit of thought maybe don't seem so ancient when we give some thought and some comparison to today and what is described in the past. Now, Paul's going deep into the past when he describes those who suppress the truth in unrighteousness in verse 18. Verse 19, he says they can know, but they just choose not to. But in verse 23, he says, because they suppress the truth, then they changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like corruptible man, birds and four-footed animals and creeping things. And so when they depart from one truth, then that leads them into a series of untruths, a series of errors. And among them being, instead of elevating man, they demote God and the idea of God. Well, think about all of these others. If this is the case, then that's kind of the conclusion, that whatever the highest power there is, we can't know, and so we might as well just use the things that we can see around us, ourselves and animals. Did you know that there are some religions who literally say that God is in everything? And so when men suppress the truth that there is a God who made all things, did you know this about Hinduism? The Lord, who is the Lord? Well, the Lord is the life in us, but not just in us. The Lord, the life in us, pervades all beings, be they plants or animals. It's believed that divine beings manifest as trees and plants, and many people worship them. If that's not Romans chapter 1 that we just read in verse 23, then I don't understand Romans chapter 1 and verse 23. The idea that God is in everything, that God literally is everything, is exactly what Paul says the Gentiles did long ago, and the Gentiles are still doing today. When you're bored the next time, instead of just scrolling randomly through the internet, you should look up this phrase, look up plant dignity. Did you know you should offer to plants dignity? I didn't either. This is not just the idea of stewardship. We do have stewardship. But in Switzerland several years ago, they passed a law that plants were to have dignity. And I'll just leave that to your imagination or to your interest. But you see the idea of bringing down what is divine, what is higher than man, and just putting really nothing above mankind, and then placing everything on an equal level. So think about all these. I won't take the time to go back through each one of them, but just for a few seconds, pick any one of these things. Maybe it's something you are familiar with and interested in, or maybe something here you hadn't heard before, and think just for a moment about one of these. What are the consequences of those ideas? Because all of these ideas have some short-term consequences. If I view myself that way, well, then that has some influence on why I'm going to do, on how I'm going to finish this day and what I plan to do this week. And of course, it has some eternal consequences. On the best of days, if I'm at a period of time that just everything's going my way, well, this has some influence on how I view that. if I'm at a period of time that just seemed to be the worst of days, maybe even more so, more vivid, this has some consequence upon that, doesn't it? Now maybe these ideas just seem far off from you and everything that you've ever learned and been taught. Maybe from your youth you understand the truth, that you might think, I'm not really very tempted to be conformed to the world in this way. Maybe now it's not much of a temptation, and you have many people to thank if that's the case. But let me be sure that you don't leave here tonight with the idea that just because you weren't captured, that your children, that your grandchildren could not, because there are many, many people spending many, many hours, spending many, many dollars with the goal of persuading your children, your grandchildren, these ideas. And you don't escape that influence by sticking your children in a closet, and you can't homeschool your children and guard and protect them from all of those influences. The influence is there, and there are people intent upon, if they can't persuade you, if you're past the age where they think you're persuadable, then your children are the prime agent. Do not be conformed to this world. How do you prepare your children not to be conformed to this world? Well, the answer is by teaching them to be transformed. And not just by your way of thinking, but sharing with them the things that can transform them, and then giving them a living example of someone who is transformed by them. Because what we're going to study next, these ideas, such as that God has made us in His image, maybe you know that. Maybe you've known that, been told that, and understood all of your life. And if so, that helps you. That is the right way to shape how you view who you are. But I also hope our study tonight will impress upon you this will have an ongoing transformation in you. If your mind is renewed, if you keep in mind constantly, every day, in some way, that I am made in the image of God, that also has consequences, not just on the grand scheme of life, but upon your decisions every single day. And so let's be transformed in renewing our view of selfhood, or just another way, as we might say it more commonly, just renewed in our mind in how we view who we are. In John chapter 4, though Jesus wasn't pursuing this subject, Jesus gave some insight into who God is, and that could be known from the Old Testament, but Jesus just said it in such a way that's so simple, just 3 words, that helps us to grasp who God is. Because if we're going to understand and believe that God made man in His image, well, before we can understand us, we have to understand Him. And what Jesus said here is that God is Spirit. That's the foundation. There's a lot more to learn, of course, about God. But when we learn that man is made in the image of God, well, we need to back up and know that God is Spirit. Then go back to Genesis chapter 1. Then go back to the beginning. And so in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and that God is Spirit. God is not made up of the material universe. God created the material universe. In Genesis chapter 1 and verse 26, on the 6th day of creation, we get some insight into the mind of God. And so, well, what does it mean that God is a spirit? Well, I don't know how to define that in every way, but we get a little bit of idea from Genesis 1. A spirit is someone who exists, someone who can think, someone who can speak, someone who can plan. Genesis 1 verse 26. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God had this plan. A spirit is someone with this ability to make plans, very detailed plans. In verse 27, God accomplished that plan. So God created man in His own image. In the image of God, He created him, male and female. He created them. So God accomplished it. And then look over in chapter 2, verse 7, we get a little bit of detail about how God accomplished it that is not described in chapter 1. Genesis chapter 2, verse 7, the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. So God made man in his image. First, he made the flesh, and we're told he made the flesh from the dust of the earth. So, the fact that we're made in the image of God doesn't have much to do with the fact that we have 2 ears and teeth and eyes. That doesn't have much to do, if anything, to do with us being made in the image of God. That's just made from the dust of the earth. But then verse 7 says that he breathed life into man, and man became a living being. Here, God gave the spirit to the flesh. This is not just saying he did CPR and infused some oxygen into the lungs of this lifeless body, but God put a spirit in the body. That's the life that he gave us. The body is not alive. It's evident here. The body is not alive without the spirit. God made man in his image primarily when he put a spirit inside of the flesh. Then go over to Isaiah chapter 42. This is history of God making man in his image, of the plan, and then him accomplishing that. But read with me Isaiah chapter 42 and verse 5. Isaiah 42 verse 5. Thus says God the Lord, who created the heavens and stretched them out, who spread forth the earth and that which comes from it, who gives breath to the people on it and spirit to those who walk on it. Just like Genesis 2:7 was not mainly about God putting oxygen into the lungs of the body, it was giving a spirit to that body. What Isaiah says here is that God is still doing that. I want to think about that for just a moment. God is still putting a spirit into the body. Now we can understand, and I think we've learned, how a body is formed. A man and a woman, the sperm and the egg, when they combine, then a body is formed. It develops, or it's in the process of forming. But what about the other part of that? How does that new life growing in the womb of a woman, how is there a spirit? Does the sperm deliver a spirit? No. Does the egg in the mother have a spirit? No. How does a spirit get there? That's not a natural, physical process. God does that. God is still making man in his image. God is still doing something, I think it's safe to say, is supernatural, is miraculous. Now, Paul describes in 1 Corinthians 13, God is not still doing miracles through the hands of man. The Holy Spirit is not still coming to man and man doing miracles. But I don't know any other word to describe when the physical process goes on. That's not miraculous. That's very natural. But how does a spirit inhabit a newly formed body? That's something only God can do. There was no spirit before that. And then there is a spirit in that newly formed and that ongoingly formed body. Giving a spirit to each new body in the womb of a mother, God continues the process of making man in his image. Now, we thought about the consequences of those other ideas. Now, what are the consequences of this? And this could be a whole other study in of itself, but just for simplicity's sake, consider Psalm 23. Someone has done well to put that to a melody so that we can sing it and maybe remember it easier that way. Or maybe you were in a class in your youth, or maybe your parents taught you and you memorized the 23rd Psalm. What that psalm teaches is that the shepherd knows the sheep. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, and He takes me here and He takes me there and He provides what I need, because the shepherd has a total knowledge of the sheep. And what that teaches is the same as what this teaches, is that God made your body, God put a spirit in your body. God has a personal, individual knowledge of you. He created your spirit. And just like a good shepherd doesn't just know the sheep are there, but God knows where to direct the sheep, where to take them, where not to take them, and when to take them or when not to take them, and when to feed them and when not to feed them, what to give them and what to not give them. A good shepherd knows the sheep well enough to do that. Well, God is the one who made my spirit, who made your spirit. So He knows us, and He is genuinely interested not just in the human race, it could be said that way, but that we personally, that we take that personally, that God has a knowledge of each one of us individually, specifically, and that He's interested in us. He knows what to offer. He knows what to provide, not just for all men. He sends His rain on the just and the unjust. That's true in a general way, but it's also true in a very specific way. That God knows your yesterday, and God knows your present, and God knows about tomorrow. And He knows the specific things that you need when the days are great and everything is great. God knows what you need and what you don't need. And when things are awful and things are terrible, God knows what you need and what you don't need. When we get this rather simple and basic idea introduced in the very first chapter of the Bible, that man is made in God's image, then there are consequences to that idea, consequences we need to know and to consider day by day. Also related to that, when we're thinking about who am I, it's also the idea that I am a body and I am a spirit. We already read from Genesis chapter 2, verse 7, that God created man. He created the physical form, the outward, the physical flesh, and that was a human body. It wasn't alive yet, but that was a human. And then God breathed into that body life. The spirit was not made from the dust of the flesh, the dust of the earth. The spirit was made from nothing. The spirit was made from the power of God. And so Genesis chapter 2, verse 7 teaches us that I am a body and I am a spirit. That's fundamental to who we are. In James chapter 2, when James is writing about the subject of faith, and that by faith alone our faith is dead, you remember that he makes then the parallel that just as faith without works, that faith without works is like the body without the spirit. The body without the spirit is what? Is dead. That tells us something about the nature of the body. Our flesh is dependent upon the spirit to live. Medical experts, it's something that the greatest still admit, from what I've read, they can't answer. At what exact point is someone dead? From what I've read, they won't say it's when the heart stops. From what I understand, medically they would say, well, no, you're still alive for some amount of time, even after your heart stops beating. You've heard the phrase maybe brain dead, and yet my understanding is they don't say someone is declared dead when they're brain dead. And so even with all of our knowledge, all of our study, from what I've read, it still escapes the greatest experts, medical experts of our day and time, exactly how do you know when someone is dead? Well, after enough time, it's obvious. But what's the point when it happens exactly? Do you know why they can't answer that question? Because of what James tells us. The moment that body is dead is the moment that the spirit leaves the body. Well, can you measure that? Nope. Any X-ray, MRI machine going to show the moment the spirit... No. So I suppose that'll just be a matter of medical discussion and journals and articles and studies and surveys, and they'll never get to the answer without this knowledge that God has given to us, that the body without the spirit is dead. Is the opposite of that true? Is the spirit without the body dead? The answer to that is no. We see that all throughout Scripture. The spirit leaves the body, and the spirit is conscious, the spirit is aware, the spirit exists separate and apart from the body. That's the nature of it. That's how God made it. Well, with this basic idea then, last, look at 1 Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 20. The idea is not merely for us just to know and to be able to walk out of here tonight and say, okay, well, yeah, I was reminded, I'm made in the image of God, and I am a body and I'm a spirit. All right, I can write that down, and I know that. That's good. But so what, as we might say? What are the consequences? What does it matter if I understand that or don't understand that? 1 Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 20, jumping into the end of a context, but the statement here is standalone in some ways. He says, "For you were bought at a price, therefore glorify God in your body and in your spirit, which are God's." Why do I need to know that I am a body and I am a spirit? Well, because I need to know who my body belongs to and who my spirit belongs to, and that will transform the way that I live, the way that I think about my body, the way that I think about my spirit. And what is said here is I'll use my body in such a way that it glorifies God. Paul said the same in Romans 12, to be a living sacrifice, or offer yourselves as a living sacrifice, your body as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God. Well, why does the use of my body have to be acceptable to God? Because, as Paul says here, because it's His. Man has been all over the map in this area. There have been in the past philosophies or ideas that, well, the body is evil, the flesh is evil, so the best thing you can do is to deny yourself pleasure. And if you can just deny yourself pleasure, then you're overcoming evil. Then there are people who have gone to the other extreme and said, well, no, pleasure, that's what it's all about. You just seek as much pleasure as you can possibly have. That's what we're here to do. Well, which one is right? Well, there's no way to determine which one is right. If we just go by human ideas, it just comes down to you picking the path that you prefer. But how different is our thinking when our idea is, well, my body belongs to the Lord. Glorify the Lord in the use of my body. Use my body in such a way that it's holy. Use my body in such a way that it is acceptable to God. So why does it matter if I choose to marry that I just have one spouse? Because that glorifies God. Why does it matter if I choose to have 5 wives? Well, because that doesn't glorify God in the use of my body with five women. Why does it matter if I'm intoxicated with wine? Could I just do that privately and then I don't influence anyone? Well, no, I can't, because we're taught not to be intoxicated with wine. The use of my body belongs to the Lord. That's why it matters, whether it's public or private. Can I end my own life? No, because my body is not mine. My body belongs to the Lord. I should be holy in spirit because my spirit belongs to the Lord. Hebrews 12 verse 9 refers to God as the Father of spirits. All spirits, in other words, belong to Him. So, why is it that if I just keep my hands clean, in other words, if outwardly I do all the right things, isn't that good enough? And does it matter what I dwell on? Does it matter what I think on? And I don't mean just the thoughts that pass through our mind, but the things that we choose to dwell on. Why does it matter if outwardly I do all the right things? Well, it matters because God, your spirit is God's. And last, just think for a moment. Not only does God see everything that everyone does outwardly with their body, God also sees the heart of men, the spirit. And we can't even fathom, but consider for just a minute, all that God sees inwardly. Think about every plan all over this earth that's being made at this moment. Out of all the plans and ideas that people are hatching, how many are wicked and evil and filthy and sinful? There is really no such thing to any degree. But think about how dark the darkness is, not just in outwardly what gets done, but before it happens, the plans that are hatched in the heart of men, and God sees all of it. Every continent, every time zone, God sees every plan. Think of all of the darkness and the depth of the darkness that God sees in the spirits that He made. The spirits are His. He's the one that made that spirit. He's the one that gave that spirit a body. And think about all that He sees with what is His. And then the point is, one opportunity. What can we offer to God? We have nothing to give Him that isn't already His. We have an opportunity if we claim to love God with our heart and soul and mind. Then when God looks at your spirit, when God looks at my spirit, when God looks at my plans and my thoughts, you and I have the opportunity, because God is willing to forgive us of our sins, to be a few points of light as God looks at this earth. Literally billions and billions of spirits. Where He looks, He sees sin, He sees darkness everywhere, constantly. But what about in your heart? What about in your spirit? God gives us the opportunity to be among the few people that when He looks, He sees light there, the light that started with Him. We can't give God anything that isn't already His. But doesn't God deserve to look at this world, to look at you and me, and to see some light there? He doesn't need it. But doesn't God deserve to see light when He looks at the spirits that He made? There are consequences to every idea. Is this world changing? Or is this world not changing? Ultimately, I'll have to admit, I've just borrowed these ideas. I don't know for sure, but whether the world is changing, whether the world is not changing, really doesn't matter, because we will be conformed if we are not transformed. And so God gives us in these first principles, these fundamental things of all the things, as I've been given the opportunity to preach for about 20 years. More and more, as I look at the world around us, I think about how important it is for the responsibility that I'm given to be sure that those who hear the gospel from me, that they know that they are made in the image of God. I hope you already knew that, and that simply the opportunity to be reminded of that will have made good use of the time that we've shared together tonight. Turn your songbooks to number 268. Whatever view the world has of itself or of you or of me, ultimately one day is not going to matter. What is going to matter when we stand before God and are judged by God is how God views you. How does God view you tonight? Your answer to that question answers then what you ought to do with what we've heard and with what you know and with what we're going to sing. If you're here tonight and you know that God views you as a sinner, lost in your sin outside of Christ, then we sing this song to urge you to turn to Christ, to confess your faith that Jesus is the Christ, or to ask your question that you might understand, to confess that faith and to be baptized in water, just as Jesus taught. He will keep His promise that he that believes and is baptized will be saved. If you view yourself as a Christian, but you know that you have returned to sin, God will keep His promise if you'll confess your sin to Him to forgive you. And we're here to stir each other up. We're here to pray for you and to encourage you if we can. And if you view yourself as walking in Christ, walking in the light, That's the privilege and blessing that we have as His people. And the song will urge us to commit our body and our spirits to finish this day in that way and to finish our life that way. If we can help you in any of these ways, come forward and tell us how as we stand and sing.